Welcome to Looking Ahead podcast. Here we try to solve the world's biggest problems using technology, leadership, and innovation. We will talk to experts and leaders in business and technology about the most pressing challenges. You will get tangible advice to grow your startup, manage your teams, and continue to innovate. I'm your host, Mo, and my guest today is Mike Frazer, the co-founder of Refactor, which was acquired recently by Sophos Corporation, a British-based security software and hardware company. We will talk today about his entrepreneurial journey from the beginning to his recent exit. We will dig into why he decided not to take any VC money to grow his startup and how he managed to do so. We will also chat about his startup pivot and how that led to a great success and eventually an exit. You will also get to learn how to build a support structure around you as an entrepreneur. And finally, Mike will share his advice about when to start thinking about your startup and how to keep going if you're already a full-time entrepreneur. Welcome everyone to Looking Ahead. We have today a special guest, Mike Frazer. He's an entrepreneur who made it. He made an exciting exit. We're going to talk about this in a bit. And Mike also has interesting professional life where he worked at interesting places like the Air Force. And I get to know Mike now for, I don't know for how long, Mike, maybe 2 years. You know, we met first time 2 years ago. Both of us were in the middle of I don't know what to call it, the roller coaster of building a startup and figuring out what is going on and hopefully getting an exit. Luckily, you and I are now pretty much in the same position. We made an exit, so it's a good time for you and I to have that chat and reflect on your experience, your career in general, and would love to share some of your wisdom and experience with the listeners. So welcome to the show, Mike.
Thanks for having me, Mohammed. Again, I think it's been 3-4 years now. Time flies. It was we met in Bellevue. I think at WeWork, if I recall, like 3 or 4 years ago. So it's been a while.
Wow, yeah, time flies, man. All right, so let's get started with your journey. How did you get to be an entrepreneur? Because this is something, I would love definitely to know about. Is this something that you planned for? Did the chance play its role here? Let's take us from as early as you feel relevant to your journey.
Yeah, so when I've been probably an entrepreneur my entire life. From childhood, I wanted to, back in the late 90s, early 2000s, before I joined the Air Force, start a computer repair store. I thought it was really fascinating that folks could make money off of fixing computers. And then I joined the Air Force in 2001, right before 9/11. And, everything got interesting after 9/11. But I still decided that I wanted to open up that computer repair shop. It ended up being a mailbox store, too, when I was 19 on active duty. And when tuition was paid for by the Air Force as well, 100% tuition assistance. So I was in school full time as well. And so I learned real early in my career that, you can start things and you can make mistakes, and the earlier you are, the better off you are to do that as well. So I'll say my first few ventures, including the mailbox store, didn't pan out the way I wanted it to, or the computer repair shop mailbox store. But it did lay the groundwork for me to realize that, it takes a lot of resilience and perseverance to work through to get to where you want to be. And, from the computer repair shop / mailbox store that I started when I was 19, I went through, while I was active duty, multiple other businesses, and then I transitioned to the Air National Guard. And I had, I went from the computer repair store to a mobile IT company, found that I could make a bunch of money doing that with folks at 20, 21 years of age. So I decided to stop going to school and focus on that full time as I was transitioning out of the active duty into the Air National Guard. And then I started a bunch of different consulting companies around virtual desktops, disaster recovery. And my first entry to products, I decided to try to tackle hardware. I was doing private cloud environments for the SMB market back in 2009 through 2011-ish. And I learned when you go from having service-based companies to product-based, hardware is definitely not the game you want to get into out of the gate. And also market timing is so critical, just building any product-based company, but it's specifically hardware. And so it was timed many, many years before the market was ready for something like that, which ended up becoming what is now considered hyper-converged infrastructure. And that was my plan, to try to get that up off the ground. That ended up not working out, realizing that there needed to be a lot more investment into that. And I've always been fairly self-sufficient in wanting to fund my own ventures versus trying to pull in outside money too. So I transitioned from that into focusing heavily in the virtual desktop infrastructure space with another company. And I got into building software. Can't get into details, but I learned that intellectual property battle, even if you're right when you're engaged with customers, can also be a interesting lesson to learn, both personally and business wise. But that ended up being the catalyst that pushed me forward to building today what was Refactor, a DevSecOps automation platform that Sophos bought last year, and that's where I'm at now. And the nice thing about the lows that happen in your life, well, not in the moment because they are lows, if you can push forward and have the wherewithal and the perseverance and resilience to continue on and pivot, was super critical for me to get to a point where I finally was able to build something that somebody else thought was valuable enough to acquire, and also doing it at a market timing that was in an area of the market that it's just starting to heat up too, around DevSecOps.
Yeah, so that's interesting. So I thought that you started earlier than that with venture-backed startups. So definitely it's much harder to build your own startup without... Tell me more about that. So what actually got you into a venture-backed startup?
We actually weren't venture-backed. We took zero VC money for a couple of reasons. Yeah, one was the issue with VCs still trying to build their thesis around this area of the market and not understanding it. And two, I have some experience working through talking to over 100 different VCs. And what I realize is that, and I say this to people now on the other side of the exit, that if VCs don't understand your area of the industry, you should be terrified of them until they make sure that they've built trust with you. And on the other side, and I've seen too many people just take money to take money. And we were able to pull it off without any VC money at all, which, is a testament of not just my other co-founders, but the ability of all the other folks that worked at Refactor who were able to help us build towards this exit as well.
Wow, that's definitely impressive, because I would say it's 10x harder to build a startup in a tech space with zero funding. Tell me more about that. Tell me more about the recent venture. How did you get the idea? And maybe we can talk about if you did any kind of pivoting in between. But let's take it from the beginning. How did you get the idea? First of all, let's take a step back. Let's introduce to the audience. I know it, but for the audience of this episode, what is the idea when you got started with it? How did you get started? And we can continue the story from that point.
Absolutely. Yeah. So I'm currently VP of DevSecOps at Sophos. I was CEO, co-founder of Refactor. Refactor started out as an ongoing idea of really wanting to build new automation or an automation platform out there that bridged the gap between what I was originally when I started my career in the Air Force, a cybersecurity practitioner, coming over to the other side, the developer world. Actually, when I started Refactor, I went back to school using my GI Bill to get my bachelor's and master's in computer science because I wanted a full immersion on the developer side so I could really have a good handle on what we needed to build and ongoing understanding of how we were going to be able to bridge that gap. My other co-founder, Anthony, is a great engineer on the software engineering side, but I was bringing in the practical experience from being more of the cybersecurity practitioner and ops person to have that expertise. And then the idea, originally, we had a product called the Cloud Security Architect Platform, and I wanted to build something that made it easier for cloud security architects to be able to have a visual way to build what normally was just a Visio or Lucidchart diagram in a way that could be actually used, as opposed to saying, hey, here's my design, and then I'm going to go off and build it in all these tools, but having no real way to visualize or represent what that looked like. And that was the genesis of what ended up becoming Refactor. Originally, we were focused in the MSP space. That's where I had a managed services company many, many years ago. So I had extensive knowledge in that space. And so we were trying to push the cloud adoption and the security around that for being able to build more modern solutions. Really found also from a timing perspective that we were significantly early to that market. They didn't have the resources that could support what needed to be done there. Not too many of them were adopting cloud services, even when we started this back in 2017. And so in 2019, we actually pivoted to enterprise and government customers, had a heavy focus also working with other cybersecurity vendors to bring them on as well. And that actually was the catalyst of which we were able to get a Air Force SBIR, Small Business Innovation Research contract with the Air Force's Platform One DevSecOps initiative. And so that pivot that we made back in 2019 was super critical to lay the groundwork for us to get acquired by Sophos last year.
Right. So I would like to, there are a few interesting facts about your startup that I would like to zoom in into a bit. So let's talk about funding part first. Did you have an idea from the beginning that you're going to need venture funding no matter what?
So that's a good question.
Or did you change your mind also along the way? I would love to hear, about your experience with VCs.
Yeah. So originally we started out, so for context, so I was in a bunch of different accelerators too, everything from Founders Institute to that was the first one we were in, to Capital Factory's Defense Accelerator. We actually were an Alchemist and Tampa Bay Waves. We were in a bunch of them, and we talked to a lot of different VCs. And what I realized was, so originally I wanted to build this thing without any outside investment. So in 2018, I actually, my wife and I, my wife was our third co-founder, sold our house, and we were all in on this this venture. So we self-funded this. Me and us three co-founders built this from nothing to a working platform, bringing on customers. And we only raised some friends and family, like a couple of friends and family, in 2020. And we were in talks with VCs about doing a Series A. So again, we had received zero outside institutional funding coming into that. But what I found was a lot of these VCs were trying to figure out the market. So I get a lot of inbound now going, hey, we're finally come around to understanding what you were trying to solve for now, in 2022. So from a standpoint of where we were, as I mentioned earlier, timing is imperative to try to raise VC money. But I'll also say the other kind of unspoken rule of especially raising early stage is you either need to have an exit or you need to know people that already know you from other companies you worked at or so on. Because I've been fairly self-sufficient my entire life, not needing outside help, I didn't have those relationships in the VC world. So the nice thing about it, though, the byproduct was we were able to exit without having to give up any stake to institutional investors when it came to that. But those are kind of my takeaways from it, from going to raise. We were in parallel raising a Series A when we were in acquisition talks with Sophos. So that was the other path we were going to go down. But we had put ourselves in a pretty good position to do that if we wanted to go down that route, because to your point earlier, it's pretty much impossible to build a software-based startup from nothing to something without being venture-backed, especially if you're building something that's focused in the enterprise and government space and a platform play. I was told by a bunch of different VCs, you can never make a platform play work as a startup, but specifically without venture backing, and we did it. So,
that's definitely it's not easy, and sometimes it's almost impossible because it's a capital intensive, I would say, area, because you have to hire people and retain them and make sure that you have the right business infrastructure so that they stay around and build the platform for a while. But doing it without an external funding requires really, unusual belief in the idea, and that you really want to, keep doing and keep, working on it, even if you don't see the light at the end of the tunnel. Now, before we switch off the VC topic, can you share with us, one or two of the stories that made you really believe, or maybe an encounter with VCs that made you believe that, I'm going to continue doing it myself without external funding? Did you go through any kind of an inflection point that made you believe that I'm going to just keep going?
Yep. So the other thing that was working against us too was the pandemic. So when the pandemic hit in 2020, every VC on the planet turned their focus from any sort of net new deals to just making sure that they can support their existing deals. So from a timing perspective, that was also working against us. But what I found working through the process with a handful of VCs, working towards getting funding, or trying to get funding from them, was the inability to give us reasonable valuations for where we were at. And so I ended up passing on a few different VCs the end of 2020 coming to 2022. And we were in Tampa Bay Wave, and that program was great. It's a accelerator out of Tampa Bay, Florida. And we were in their inaugural CyberX cohort. And we got an introduction to Sage Growth Capital for revenue-based financing, and we ended up doing that as opposed to getting any institutional money because of the fact that it was just so frustrating. Because people would come at us and say, "Hey, I'll offer you this valuation," and we're like, "No. With the revenue we have and the customers and the Air Force contract and everything we built from nothing, we're not going to accept anything less than something reasonable." And that was really kind of the catalyst for us to receive the revenue-based financing, which actually helped us get through to acquisition, in lieu of also the Air Force contract that was delayed about 7 or 8 months. And we ended up getting the contracting for it a year after. So we received our phase 1 in March of 2020. And then the phase 2 we received in March of 2021.
Nice. Okay, cool. So nice. That's, Yeah, I would say for any entrepreneur, there's one of those meetings that would make you, really either regret getting money from VCs or or don't want to do it. And I know it's not definitely an easy process. It's like sales, right? You have to talk to many VCs before you can get one or two yes. And along the way, you get a lot of, you come across a lot of skeptics and they definitely drain a lot of energy and of course time from you while you really want to go and build your product and see your vision yourself, closer every day to your vision. Let's maybe zoom into the pivot part. Because that's also, I would say it's a debatable point among many. In the startup, community in the Bay Area, they say, move fast and fail faster. And some of it, they talk about. Some of them talk about the pivot as part of it. But I don't know if the pivot actually comes for free. It definitely has an impact one way or another. It's not something that you can do every day. It's important and you have to do it if you have to do it. But it's not something that you can do, frequently. I don't know. What's your point of view on that? And I would love to hear your story around the pivot. What made you actually do that pivot?
So when we were focused on the MSP world, we were getting a lot of different feedback on some of the limitations of the first version of the product we built. And the interesting thing was, I worked at a couple different cybersecurity companies, and my other co-founder Anthony was out looking for some software engineering jobs because we were like, well, we're kind of at the end of our road. This was back in 2019. So do we want to pivot here and try to build the next version of what this platform should be? And the interesting thing out of all of that is we ended up all three of us getting together, and I was like, you know what? Anthony wanted to reel back and say, let's build something much smaller, much more focused. And I said, no. I want to build the platform that I've envisioned from the beginning that we didn't quite get right in the first version. So we both worked full time on it for months to build this new version of the platform that we launched beginning of 2020. Him and I together to get this new product out, really trying to fix any of to add to the functionality that we didn't have in the first version of the product, and just give some context to that we supported some of the tools that we support now, like Ansible, but we embedded it in the back end so it wasn't exposed to the user. And so our goal with the new version was we wanted to expose that and a bunch of different tools there. And the interesting thing was that was a product pivot, not a focus pivot. So we launched the product at ConnectWise IT Nation, a MSP conference back in 2019. And when we got into 2020, we realized that there really just wasn't the adoption that we were expecting from the MSP world. And we pivoted to enterprise and government. And that's also the year that we applied for the CIBR contract as well. So it was kind of a 1-2 approach where we completely revamped the entire product from the ground up. And then the second approach was the business focus, re-honing our focus from, again, shifting it from the MSP world to the enterprise and government world. And it was actually a good thing we did, because the nice thing about being at Sophos now is the byproduct of Sophos being a chattel company is that we have the ability to go after the MSP community, but as a secondary approach to what we're now building, what was Refactor, which is now Sophos Factory at Sophos.
Now I know that all of this just behind you, but walk me through your feelings and how you had that discussion. Probably those discussions were not easy. Probably things are not as as clear as you back then. They were not as clear as you tell us the story right now. I'd love to hear, how did you feel before the pivot? You mentioned that you guys, were about, to fold down the company or go and find another job. And you decided to make, I don't know, it's a bet or a gamble, or how did you see it? I would love to hear more. What the feelings really matter, because I know there are a lot of entrepreneurs. If you would ask me, especially the first time entrepreneurs, they see things from outside and they think that, just done anyways like that. And they don't see the feelings. So take us more through your emotional journey as, before, during the pivot, after the pivot, and before that would be great if you can just share some of that with us here.
So it was difficult to be at a point where you realize that the product that you built wasn't quite right, and it wasn't exactly what the market that you were building towards could get it right. I was very lucky to find my other co-founder, Anthony, who could build something from nothing with me and help us realize our vision. And then also, be it that my wife, Corrine, who was our other co-founder, that made it even more interesting from a standpoint of it was front and center every day of our lives while we had the startup. And so it was a do or die from a standpoint of, like, obviously I can get past anything, and I've gone from, down to nothing and built things back up again. But at the same time, when you have a, wife who's your co-founder and a family, it makes your decision making a little, usually you think that you'd be more risk adverse. But I just had this feeling that I was onto something that we needed to build, and I wanted to go big enough that it was going to be something that was going to be valuable for a company from a acquisition standpoint. Later on, I didn't think we were going to get picked up as quickly as we did, but at the same time, I saw this vision of what I wanted to build out there, and I just couldn't let it go. And that was really what was the catalyst then. I also say, having really good support structure in your life is vital to pulling this off, because they say, like, it's lonely at the top, but it's very lonely being a startup founder trying to pull something off. So if you can pull in other really good complementary co-founders to yourself, it baffles me sometimes when I see solo co-founders that haven't built a startup from scratch before. But a lot of times that only works if they have a really good support structure behind them, or they've had a prior exit, or prior companies they've built, so they know how to do that. But I've always had I've always kind of tried to pull on complementary folks that could make something work, as opposed to trying to do it, solo myself.
Yeah. Hold on. So that's, you mentioned a really important point here, support structure. I'm assuming that the first, I would say, team or kind of people that you were leaning on, definitely your co-founders, your wife, and, your other co-founder. What else in one of the things that I think a lot of entrepreneurs overlook is building that support structure. They do not see how bad it could be. Again, out of, they do not have the experience yet. So they ignore that part. And then they end up, super, super lonely and helpless at the same time. How did you really, approach all of that? Obviously your co-founders definitely are the first ones, but take me at, for the, the outer circles, or, the bigger circles, if you don't mind, and tell us more, how did you build that support structure around you as an entrepreneur?
Yeah, absolutely. So besides my awesome co-founders, I also pulled in some advisors to the company that we could talk to, and I mean we talk to every week on different things going on, and I would say that was another super critical thing that we put in place that was definitely helpful. And sometimes it's really a reality check just to make sure that things that are baffling you or, possibly baffling to them, or they give you feedback that helps you kind of fine tune how you think about things. But at the end of the day, it's just really hard to, start a startup, but also trying to keep yourself on point so you don't think that, you go down one path that becomes detrimental to your company. Because with startups, one decision could be the downfall of your entire company. And I hate to make it sound that ominous, but it really is. You have to be very careful about all the decisions you make. And so it's always good to have other folks that have been around, longer than you, or complement you with other traits that can really help you make the best decisions you possibly can. And not every decision's every decision's the right decision because it's getting you towards the progress you're going, but it may not be the best decision. So you really have to be cognizant of that. And so having other voices to help keep you on point was super critical to build that support structure, at least when we were building Refactor.
Absolutely. Now, did you have any mentors beside advisors, or do you consider them the same thing?
Yeah, so I've never had, I had some people that have been in my life for a long period of time. I never had any official mentors. I've been very, in some ways, kind of self-reliant on my, on myself from that standpoint. I've pushed looking to get, different people to pull in as mentors, and they haven't worked out for whatever reason. I'll say that my wife's not my mentor. She's by far the best support to try to keep me on point too. Because a lot of times, and as this is being in a startup, things, just doing it seems, you do it because you don't think about it and you start the company. But when you get into it, some things seem to be impossible. And that's really what separates, entrepreneurs from, business owners per se. But at the same time, having somebody that can, help get you, out of a rut or your thought process a certain way, it was definitely a major or something that really helped to make sure that we were able to get through this. And I think when you have everybody has like full skin in the game, it becomes a whole different approach, which is also kind of going back to our VC discussion. Sometimes I see folks raise money and, it can make it easy to coast for a while when you raise money too. So I think when you have no other choice, it forces you to make decisions a certain way versus, being super well funded where you can wait out, industry or build out your pipeline or do different things that, typical companies do when they raise funding versus, being all in yourself. But I wouldn't recommend it for everybody either. It's a higher risk, high reward, but also a high probability of failure too.
Yeah, absolutely. Before we talk about, the exit and how, it went anyways, tell me about the darkest moment that you had in that recent journey. Yeah,
that's a good question. There were probably a few. Some of them were during pivots. Also, some of them were due to delays. So that's also where the whole funding conversation comes in as well. So when you're completely bootstrapped and you're trying to make something work, will be times where you have to go to your employees and have them make decisions that you wish you never had to, not just have the discussion, but try to get everybody on board that they, and see that everybody believes in what you're trying to do. And I'll say that, we were in between, the announcement and getting the contract for the Air Force. And we were also in between trying to close that revenue-based financing. And that was a place where everybody came to the table in the company to make concessions on compensation to make it work for us as a company. And if that didn't happen, we wouldn't have been able to get to acquisition. So that was probably the lowest and darkest place that I was, because it was just, it was do or die, but it was also having to have other people have to make sacrifices too, that I never wanted to have those discussions. Now, on the other side, everybody's at Sophos now, which is awesome. So I think from that standpoint, it's been a blessing. But it was, we definitely had a low moment as a company beginning of last year.
Absolutely. Now, how did you did not definitely have the certainty, I would say, that things will end up the way they are right now. How did you get yourself through all of that? What was keeping you going?
It wasn't so far into trying to make this work, and we were seeing successes with bringing on new customers, and we had revamped our whole pricing model the year before. We were bringing on net new customers. We were closing the Air Force contract. So all the groundwork was being laid in, saying, hey, look, there's actually something to this. There's a market out there for it. There are customers who are willing to pay us for this. And even though we were having such a difficulty with the investment raise, we actually went into another accelerator, Alchemist Accelerator. So we were in that to raise the Series A. And then we had conversations. We started having conversations around acquisitions. So we were running both in parallel. So at that point, it was, we were on the other side of it. And it became much more apparent that there was not just more interest, even though we had run up into, the roadblocks in the VC world, but also we just really figured out market timing, and were able to get us through to the point where we were able to have technology that Sophos wanted.
Now, let's talk about the best moments of your journey. Tell me about one moment that you felt, it worth it. Other than the exit. I know that the exit definitely is a special moment by itself. But before the exit, what was, one of those moments that you felt proud?
When we built the second, the version for the product from the ground up, and we got our first user on, and he was building, he was basically moving his infrastructure from a data center to Microsoft Azure, and he started building out a bunch of different automation in our platform. And at that moment, I was like, wow, okay, we have something here. And within fairly short order after that, we were able to pull on some bigger customers. But I think at that moment, it was like, oh, okay, we actually have something that's not just useful, but people are putting a lot of time and effort and energy into doing something that's super mission critical to their organization, moving the infrastructure and using the platform to automate all of their infrastructure integrations into their move to a public cloud provider.
Good. Now let's talk about the exit then. How did it all start? And any suspense that you had in that journey? Because it's not, the exits, they just look really nice in the PR, but I know that there's a lot of work, a lot of things that could go wrong until you reach that moment.
Yeah, and we did everything very non-traditional too. So some other folks that I know that were running parallel acquisitions were engaged with investment bankers, and the things that you do, a lot of companies will do in that process. And we said, no, we're going to just do this on our own and make this work. And I think as we were working through the whole process, I think we realized everything takes 2 to 3 times longer than you think it will. There are going to be points during the process where you think that both sides are just going to walk away with it. But I think if you're both on the same page, your vision lines up with the company that's acquiring. But I'd also be very careful on, just wanting to be acquired for acquisition's sake too. If you're, other than, obviously the monetary exit component, but if you want to continue working towards the vision that you had as the startup, because it's going to, it's kind of like having a kid or a baby, it's no longer going to be yours. And so, you have to make sure that you're in complete alignment. At least, things will change after you come on board, but at least from a strategy and vision standpoint, where the company is going, or as we see a lot of acquisitions happen, where they just get cannibalized or tucked in, and you no longer have an identity, or you're not really being able to realize any part of the vision that you had coming in there. So just set your expectations up too. on what that looks like. But I think being in very good alignment with the company that's acquiring you is super critical when you're looking at acquisition or an exit.
Absolutely. Now, your baby now is not yours anymore after the acquisition. And definitely there's some emotions that you personally as a CEO and a founder that you went through. Walk us through this. How did you feel immediately after 1 month after and so on? I think you're now almost 1 year into it, right?
Yeah, 7 months.
Okay, so probably a lot happened during those 7 months, emotionally to you from day one till today.
Yeah, so I think overall, being acquired by a larger company, there's a lot of, you're not anywhere close to the structure that you are going from a 10-person company to thousands of employees. So I think that's it's always going to be a shock to any startup system coming in. I also think as you work in a new organization, just being able to navigate something that is exponentially bigger, that has bigger vision and things that we want to pull off as a company. I think you end up making certain compromises as you're building things out. But I would also say, don't stop fighting for what you believe, as long as it makes sense and it can align with the company's objectives and longer term strategy. And, they're not going to buy, companies don't buy other companies, usually, I should say, this isn't, across the board, but usually just to pull in the technology and not do anything more with it than as it stands. So the strategy of what that roadmap looks longer term, I would say, fight for what makes sense, but pick and choose your battles wisely. I learned that early in my career when I was in the Air Force. And so that was a good lesson, or a good lesson to learn.
Right?
Yeah, exactly.
Literally.
Exactly.
Pick your battles.
Exactly. Literally. Yep. Exactly.
All right. Sounds good. Now, cool. So what is your advice for people who want to be entrepreneurs?
I would say that there's no right time to be an entrepreneur. I know a lot of people want to think about planning. I was given all kinds of advice very early in my career on, you need to have, this much money in the bank, or you should be working somewhere else before you decide to go do your own thing, or all this stuff. And the reality is, if you have the entrepreneur spirit, you have the ability to, you're going to have to take risk. And as I mentioned earlier, what I view that separates entrepreneurs from business owners is the level of risk and financial risk that you're willing to take, and generally, versus a business owner. And I've been a business owner too. I've had, multiple businesses in the, IT space, around services, and you can build that up into a nice business, but that isn't really being a business owner versus an entrepreneur. An entrepreneur looks at things big picture and then tries to pull off things that are impossible. It's fairly easy to start your own services company and make it successful. Very difficult to try to build something from nothing when it comes to, a product that you're going to provide to customers. And so I would think about it from that standpoint of, the earlier you start in your career, the more time you have to fail, because you will fail, and you will fail many times as an entrepreneur. So realize that. And don't ever take your eye off what you want to try to pull off and accomplish, and don't think anything is too big to do. It may, you don't become an entrepreneur because you just want to be status quo type person. You're trying to do things that are change your industry or change the world. And I would say just keep on point with that type of thought process as you're doing it. And it's going to take a lot of risk, and you're going to probably be asked to have to go all in. And if you believe in it, you should do it. But being an entrepreneur isn't for everybody either. So I would say, don't take that decision lightly to jump in to be an entrepreneur. But at the same time, if you decide to go down that path, be ready to to be resilient, persevere, and put a lot of blood, sweat, and tears into what you're trying to accomplish.
Absolutely. I love that. I love that the fact that you mentioned that you need to do the startup many times, because, the more you fail, the more you learn. And then, The way that I would, describe it, you're not on a linear trajectory as an entrepreneur, either when you're successful or when you, quote unquote fail, because failure is not really failure until you decide it's a failure. You make an experiment with a startup, you fail. The next one should be, an exponential growth from or exponentially better than the previous one, and so on. So eventually you're going to definitely make something much bigger than anyone would imagine. Cool. So now, what is your advice for someone who just got started as a full-time entrepreneur?
I would say build your support structure early. Build your relationships. I would say that relationships are key to being an entrepreneur, and find people that complement your strengths and also can be the inverse to your weaknesses too. I think that is super critical as well. And don't try to do everything yourself. I'm that type of person, and I had to learn very early in my career that I have to find folks like that, whether they're your co-founders or people that you hire, because you can't do it all. And that's something that you should learn very early down your entrepreneurial journey, is to find those type of people to work with you, because it's not a solo journey. The support is critical for you to pull off whatever you're trying to as an entrepreneur. And so that would be my advice.
Well, at the end of this episode, I'd love to, thank you, Mike. It's been a pleasure talking to you. You went through a lot, since your early days, of your career. And congratulations again on the exit and the acquisition. I remember when you and I first met a few years ago. I could see this on your face, and I could see it on my face when I look at the mirror, that we're exhausted. It's not easy. Sometimes you have this feeling that you wanted to finish as soon as possible, but at the same time you want to keep going because, you're really proud of what you built. So again, congrats to what you built there, to the great exit. And I know, man, that you're, that's not the last game. I would say so. When you're an entrepreneur, you're an entrepreneur, until the last day, I would say. I would
totally agree with that. There's nothing stopping being an entrepreneur, no matter what, which is, to your point, there are times where you're completely, I think it's like, you're always exhausted as an entrepreneur, putting in all the time that you possibly can to make it work. And I'll also say to that, if you have a family and kids and you're all in on this, it will be tough, but also try not to lose sight or what you're trying to do for your family. And also, time is as precious as trying to make an exit happen for any other purpose. So, also realize that and it's difficult to balance as an entrepreneur, but trying to figure out how to, make sure you still have time for your family is super critical too. And I see a lot of entrepreneurs now that have families trying to make it work. And it's tough because, you're going to lose a bunch of time because you're all in on trying to make it work. So just never lose sight of what you're trying to do for your family as well when you're building up your company or your startup.
Absolutely. Absolutely. But thank you very much, Mike.
Thanks for having me. Thanks, Mohammed.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Looking Ahead. Please pass it along to someone you believe can apply some of what we discussed here at their jobs or personal lives. For updates on upcoming episodes or to find out how to be my next guest, please visit my website, mohammedfahmed.com. Until then, remember to keep looking ahead.